We've discovered a secret that will not just open your eyes, it will revolutionize how you think about your health. You have two options. Stop this video now and continue believing what you think is true. Or keep watching and discover a life-changing secret to better health. Your body is a masterpiece made up of trillions of cells. Each one works like a major production facility, absorbing nutrients from food, converting them into energy, and carrying out specialized functions in your body. All of this happens without you having to think about it. In a perfect world, the cells get the nutrients they need from what you eat and drink. However, science has revealed a group of essential nutrients that 97% of the world population is unknowingly short of. A problem lurking within the body, affecting various aspects of your well-being. This is not a minor deficit, it is dramatic. Because they regulate the flexibility of your cell membranes, how well your cells absorb nutrients and remove waste. They're vital for your cognitive functions. Your cardiovascular system relies on them. Your heart needs them every single day. And they even support your immune system to do what it does best. Keep you healthy and energized throughout the day. But one question remains. How can you find out if you're getting enough of these essential nutrients that hold a key to unlock your body's potential? With just a small drop of blood, you can get the knowledge and power you need to set everything right. Testing your levels will uncover your personal needs. Restoring them will revolutionize human health forever. When life-changing innovations are revealed, they give birth to multi-billion-dollar industries. Ideally, you want to enter a large existing market with sustainable growth and technology that sets you apart as 10 times better than the current market leaders. That is what we have. Thanks to our groundbreaking Scandinavian health tech solution. Today, more than 3 billion people care enough about their health to either take supplements or follow specialized diets. Our test will open their eyes. Are you in the safe zone or among the 97% who are not getting enough of these essential nutrients? Having your own health plan is pure logic. Getting proof that it's working should be too. We predict that more than 1/3 of this already interested group will put their supplements to the test during the next decades. That's 1 billion people, giving you the unique opportunity to leverage this megatrend in the making. What if you could play a pivotal part? What if you created a fulfilled career in this megatrend? What if participating in this test-based revolution enabled you to live life on your own terms? Picture a life where your heart beats stronger, your mind is sharper, and your days are filled with boundless energy. This is the success story waiting for those who embrace the power of personalized nutrition. Remove the guesswork. Don't let this opportunity pass you by. Join us. Share this secret. Act on this life-changing innovation. My name is Hilda. I'm the co-founder of Zenzino, and I can't wait to meet you.
I'm going to talk about chronic inflammation and it's affecting public health, why the pharmaceutical model of reactive medicine has failed, and how we are, for the first time, in a position to apply genuinely effective and safe preventative strategies. And as you can see here, the title of my talk is "We Can't Keep Eating Like This." I don't think we can't afford to. And I'm going to quote the American economist who in 1986 coined Stein's law, which is a very simple law. It seems very obvious. He said, if something cannot go on forever, it will stop. And it's true not only in economics and metaeconomics, but it absolutely applies to the current system of healthcare because it's ruinously expensive. The costs continue to go up, the demand continues to go up, and the supply, if anything, is starting to limit because we see supply chains all over the world now starting to show signs of strain, thanks in no small part to the criminality and destructiveness of the current generation of Western politicians. However, I'm not going to use this as a soapbox. I'll get straight into the science. And I just want to quickly review some of the reasons why the healthcare system is at or near the point of bankruptcy and why we're seeing so much more rationing of healthcare, even in the apparently wealthiest economies. One of the reasons why healthcare costs keep on rising is the increasing demand, but also the increasing cost of many of the pharmaceuticals. The last decade or so has seen a very significant shift from what we call small molecules, pharmaceuticals, to biologicals. This is a move towards increasing specificity. It certainly has put up the cost. If you look at costs in North America, they range anywhere from between $10,000 and $500,000 a year, and that cost is rising year on year. One of the growth areas in public health is, of course, cancer. All the common cancers are increasing in frequency, and they're appearing in younger groups of patients. This is a very common pattern now, sadly. And if we look at the cost of cancer drugs, these days they average close to $300,000 a year. Who can afford that? Individuals may be able to, but a nation cannot. This culminates with a drug called Zolgensma, which is a drug that's used to treat a particular form of neonatal spinal atrophy. And that comes in at just over $2 million for a single injection. Um, and you can roll the dice if you want because the injection it will cure one case in two and it kills the other. So that kind of gamble for that kind of price, this does not seem to me to be good medicine. And then we have this issue with supply chains. The current militaristic behavior of the United States and its vassal states in Ukraine, Taiwan, and now Iran is stretching supply chains all over the world. And we have to find ways of bringing some of the supplies nearer to home, stabilizing them, and making them more affordable. What about demand? Well, if anything, that's increasing even more rapidly. If we look at USA National Health surveys, and I'm choosing them because we've got such good and extensive data. The first one of these was carried out in 1935. What the trialists showed was that 1 in 10 adults had a chronic condition amongst children and adolescents. It was less than 2%. It was probably closer to 1%. I have to admit that the figures are not particularly good. By the year 2000, instead of 10% of adults, that had increased to 45%. By 2020, it was now 60% of adults with one chronic degenerative non-communicable condition. And amongst children and adolescents, the figures had leapt from probably close to 1% to in excess of 40%. This is a catastrophic increase. Then because we're all of us being chronically poisoned by the modern diet and lifestyle, the numbers of people with multiple diseases have increased from 1935, when less than 5 adults in 100 had more than one chronic degenerative disease. By 2018, it was a quarter. By 2022, 40%. And these patients, of course, are difficult to treat. They're expensive to treat. They're complicated. They take up a lot of bed space and time. Again, another huge drain on our scarce medical resources. If I were to show you those same results in graphic form, as you can see here, if we continue in this way, by about the year 2070, every single person in North America will have a chronic non-communicable condition. We cannot afford to continue in this way. This is madness. Let's just see if I can get. Yep, so these diseases are very expensive. They are running at just under 20% of the United States GDP. We're seeing them occurring in younger and younger subjects, so not just only in North America, but globally. And this is the reason why health expectancy, the number of years you can expect to live while retaining reasonable health, that is falling, both in the United States and in the United Kingdom. And I'm singling out these two countries because they are two of the nation states that consume the highest percentage of their calorie intakes in the form of ultra-processed foods. This is a red flag. This is the incidence of metabolic, it's a metabolic skewing, if you like. We used to call it NAFLD. It's now MASLD. Look at the rate in increase from 1990, 1 in 5 of the world's population, and we're now heading towards almost half of the world's population. And the reason why I talk about MASLD is because the liver is considering what it does, considering its biochemical and physiological role. It's extremely good at repairing itself, but those defenses are being overwhelmed, as you can see here. If they're being overwhelmed in the liver, where else are they being overwhelmed? Well, the cancer rates are absolutely on a tear. This is colorectal cancer amongst Americans under 50 in terms of cancer. These are young patients. If you think this is bad, you should see the data for appendiceal cancer, which is increasing almost twice as rapidly. And here you've got the increase in diagnoses of autism. I have to say, I have to admit, this is somewhat of a weaker case because there are clearly changing diagnostic criteria that are involved in this, but there appears to be a significant underlying real increase in the numbers of children presenting with neurodevelopmental diseases as well. So what other diseases are increasing? Actually, it would be easier for me to list the diseases that aren't increasing. Now, this is just an alphabetical list. As you can see, it only goes from A to E. This is not a complete list. All of these diseases are increasing in frequency. They're decreasing in latency. That is, we see them occurring in younger and younger subjects. And I'm going to go through some of the rest of the alphabet. This is not a complete list, but if you look at all of these, you can see amongst them almost all of the major causes of ill health and premature death that exist today. They are all increasing. And with the exception of the neurodevelopmental diseases, obviously most of which manifest early in life, all of the others are occurring in younger and younger groups of patients. This metabolic poisoning that I was talking about not only manifests in increasing incidence of disease, but it impairs the functioning of our more complex systems. One of the more complex systems, of course, is the central nervous system. It manifests intelligence. And when you look at IQ and you measure it in various different ways, what you find is that world average IQ has been falling fairly consistently since 1950. In reality, it's been falling since about 1900, but since 1950, the fall really started to speed up. You can measure IQ in a number of different ways. This is just one. Other people have used different methods to study it, and they show a similar depressing shape of decline. And another one of our more complex systems is the reproductive system. And this is another graph that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. It documents falling sperm counts all over the world. And the red trace at the far end suggests that, if anything, since 2000, the decline has been even more rapid. It looks very much as if the male sexual apparatus, the reproductive apparatus, is under threat. The testes produce not only spermatozoa, but also testosterone, and testosterone levels have fallen by about 20% over the last couple of decades. Men are becoming, in some ways, less masculine. The modern diet also increases the risk of PCOS in women and increases testosterone levels in some females. And so these changing endocrinological tides may well be contributing to the increased incidence of gender dysphoria that we see so much of today. Certainly, it's one of the reasons why populations are crashing. Now, these are total fertility rates in just a handful of countries. And just to put this in perspective, in order for a population to be maintained over time, you need a fertility rate of somewhere close to 2.6. That allows for neonatal mortality, but it also includes the increasing numbers of couples who decide not to have children. And you can see here that most countries are below the maintenance rate. And in fact, the OECD and the WHO project that by 2099, the populations in very many of these countries will have fallen by half, which is a calamitous decline. It's not happening in a managed way, it's happening in a chaotic way. And it's quite unlikely, actually, that complex and advanced civilizations, such as we still claim to be, can actually survive this type of population decline. On top of that, you have the pension time bomb. These are, this is something that you should be worried about as well. These are the numbers of people in the workforce who are supplying and supporting those people who have finished their working lives and require various types of medical and sociological support. In 2020, in 1955, you can see there were 6 people of working age in the workforce who were generating revenue, which was supporting the elderly. By 2025, that had fallen by just under 3 to 1. By 2050, it'll fall to 2.2 to 1. And again, this is another recipe for social and socioeconomic collapse. We can't cope with this. Can we use drugs to keep the tides at bay? Well, the answer is no. You can use the most sophisticated techniques to try and work out who's most at risk. This is known as polygenic risk scoring. You're looking at a total of single nucleotide polymorphisms to see who is at risk. 3 major studies which have attempted to find out who is at risk and who should be treated preventively. They just failed because almost all of these diseases, the lifestyle factors are far more important than any genetic risk factors. So, in other words, it's not worth doing this polygenic risk scoring because it's insufficiently predictive to justify costs. And even if it was more predictive, you could not use it to decide who to give pharmaceuticals preventatively to because the pharmaceuticals are just too toxic. So, we need to find, I think, a new way of going about this, a new way of distributing and making healthcare accessible. And I think we need to consider that many of the problems that we face now represent a failure of complex centralized systems. In the case of the healthcare system, which is built on a model that was first really took shape in the second half of the 19th century and is clearly no longer fit for purpose. So we've reached the end of the road, I would say, in terms of reactive healthcare. We need to find a new way of generating systems of healthcare that are safer, they're more cost effective, more decentralized, and hopefully more resilient as well. And that is what I believe we can now offer. To understand what they need to be, you need to look at a little bit of the epidemiology of chronic degenerative disease. And it tells you when the problem started, and that allows us to get a better handle on what the nature of the problem is. Now, the solid lines show the numbers of people who died of infectious diseases, in this case of the respiratory system. So we're talking about influenza, tuberculosis, things like that. And the dotted lines are the numbers of people who died of non-communicable diseases, so chronic obstructive airway disease, various neoplasms and things like that. And you can see that they start to cross over in the early 50s. So the question then would have to be what happened in the early 50s? That's the wrong question. It's a trick question because most of the chronic degenerative non-communicable diseases take a decade or so, sometimes more, to become clinically obvious. They are slowly developing diseases. What we should be asking is what happened in the 40s or perhaps at the end of the 30s. And the answer to that is this is what happened. That's when we start shifting towards a diet consisting of industrial foods. Some people call them brown foods, ultra-processed foods, call them what you will. In the United States, various studies, they don't all entirely agree, but they tend to center around 55 to 60% of all calories being taken in the form of ultra-processed foods. And amongst children and teenagers, that figure rises to an astonishing 67%. This is a dreadfully unhealthy diet because the more of these foods you eat, the more you die. Cancer, type 2 diabetes, early death, it's dose-related, increased risk of dementia. There's pretty good data for that too. Accelerated biological aging. This is the diet that's killing us. And that's why when you look at the international rankings for life expectancy, you can see that the United States, which is the dark blue trace, and the United Kingdom, which is the light blue trace, have fallen from position 13 and 10, where they were in 1950, to position 53 and 36 in 2020. The one graph that's going in the opposite direction is the green one, that's Japan. They introduced a category of food called foshu, foods specifically designed to provide health benefits, and look what's happened to them. They've shot up the international league tables from position 45 in 1950 to position number 3 in 2020. And they have achieved this remarkable improvement, not really through employing more doctors or using more pharmaceuticals, but by improving their diet. They got the basics right, and it's paid off in a very, very big way. We don't need to go into this. I just wanted to show you who it was that's killing you. These are the brands you love, the products you love. And the reason why this diet kills you is because the major anti-inflammatory compounds have been removed. So lots of omega-3s, which my colleague was mentioning, and not enough polyphenols. And I'll talk a little bit about more of those later. But the food industry then take away two more compounds, or groups of compounds, I should say, which have very important anti-inflammatory effects as well. So the most important four categories of anti-inflammatory protective compounds, if you like, have gone, and they've been replaced by three sets of compounds which are pro-inflammatory. So it's not surprising that the more of these foods, the more chronic inflammation you have, and the more you die. This is a diet that will most certainly make you sick, and it will kill you before your time. What is it in that diet that's doing it? Doesn't help looking at all the different compounds, because a person who's eating ultra processed foods will eat anything from 20,000 to up to 50 or even 100,000 different compounds over the course of a month or so in the different types of foods that we're eating. So I think it's more helpful to see if we can peer beyond this curtain of variables. We know it affects the epigenome and the metabolome, but how is it doing it? Gets much simpler at this point, because it's really killing us by four major mechanisms, which are made worse by our low energy lifestyle. It causes chronic inflammation for the reasons I've said. Chronic inflammation leads eventually to destruction of healthy tissue. The industrial diet, lots of empty calories, which means we're depleted in lots of not just vitamins and trace elements, but a lot of phytonutrients. So you get type B malnutrition, which means you can't heal and replace the tissue that was destroyed by chronic inflammation. Then the box number two, dysbiosis. This diet gives us completely the wrong population of microbes in the large intestine and therefore every other tissue, which causes a raft of problems on its own. And finally, over to the right, glycemic mismatch, which means too much starch, too much sugar. You're pouring glucose into the bloodstream. And because we're so physically inactive, we're not pulling enough of it out. So we move towards metabolic skewing, we move towards hyperglycemia, hyperinsulinemia, metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, late stage complications, and an acceleration of the overall aging process. A bit discouraging, but what that means is, now that we know how this diet and lifestyle is killing us, we can propose antidotes. And what we have found is you can stop chronic inflammation with a combination of omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids plus polyphenols. Neither of them work on their own. You need them both. You can remedy type B malnutrition with a very, very broad spectrum support program, not just of micronutrients, but the key phytonutrients as well. You can reverse dysbiosis and restore a much earlier and much healthier microbiota using a kind of time-release blend of prebiotic fibers. And as for glycemic mismatch, well, less sugar, less starch, more exercise, or if you're too lazy, you can't do that for some reason, there are hacks. And one of these is the so-called AMPK upregulator group of compounds, all of which are natural and derived from herbs, and which we can talk about later if you wish. So here's your cell membrane. The cell membrane consists of lipid components. And the key amongst those, you've got omega-6s, that's arachidonic acid over on the left, omega-3s, eicosapentaenoic acid, docosahexaenoic acid over on the right. Those are the blue boxes. And you need them both because you need them both to create and maintain and stop inflammatory reactions. That's essential. If you're challenged, there's that little lightning bolt by a microbe or physical injury, you need to start an inflammatory sequence. And the arachidonic acid breaks down and forms compounds that drive inflammation. When the challenge has been neutralized, then the EPA and the DHA, the omega-3s on the right, they make compounds which stop the inflammation. So that's a healthy situation, all well and good. The problem arises because the modern diet gives us very large amounts of the omega-6s and not enough of the omega-3s. So your accelerator's on the floor all the time, the brake's not working, and we run into trouble. Here's another way of looking at it. This could be an immune cell, such as a neutrophil. It's reacting to a stimulus, and it's causing redness, swelling, pain, the classic signs of acute inflammation. That's all well and good, but those cells are also dripping little particles into the spaces between the cells. They're called exosomes. And the problem is they contain a lot of information, including enzymes called matrix metalloproteases. And they're very destructive, very destructive. So a healthy diet will give you the right 6:3 ratio plus compounds called polyphenols, which inhibit those matrix metalloproteases and keep them under control. Here's the problem. The modern diet gives you a very high ratio of 6:3s. And so the first stage of this inflammation cascade is overheating. And then the modern diet takes away the polyphenols. And now the second stage is also overheating, and your immune cells are dripping these very destructive matrix metalloprotease enzymes into the extracellular matrix, which is what's holding all your cells together. It's a three-dimensional mesh of microfibers that holds all your cells together so they can function collectively. If you're dripping matrix metalloprotease enzymes into this mesh, all the fibers dissolve and you turn to goulash. These are the same enzymes that are produced by flesh-eating bacteria, which produce a lot of these enzymes in a short period of time, and they dissolve you. They dissolve everything. It is the same enzymes released in small amounts over long periods of time that lead to the loss of bone or cartilage or brain cells or any other tissue in the body that is affected by chronic degenerative disease. This is the key to chronic degenerative disease. And what this graph shows is how the ratio of 6:3s has risen and risen and risen. It's now, instead of being 1 or 2 to 1, which it has been for as long as records have been kept, it's about 15 to 1 in Europe, 25 to 1 in North America, and it's even worse in some other countries. And in the meantime, our polyphenol intakes have fallen by between 60 and 90%. And if anyone wants to know why, we can talk about that later. Now, because we're so inactive, we're not eating as much food as our grandparents and great-grandparents used to do. And a lot of those foods are ultra-processed. They're full of empty calories, so we end up with malnutrition. Now, this is not type A malnutrition, which you see in the medical textbooks. That looks like this. Typically, you've got a starving child, maybe in Africa, and they could have kwashiorkor and beriberi or scurvy, something like that. We don't see that. We see a pattern where people are low in everything except probably calories, and because they're eating foods like this. Lots of calories, no micronutritional value at all. This is confectionery. And we eat them because we love them. They're designed to be addictive. This is the worst. All calories all the time and nothing else. And this is why Father Christmas, because he drinks too much Coca-Cola, probably has diabetes, heart disease, dementia, and not a single tooth left in his head. And we're too lazy. There's some ridiculous examples. Over on the right is a remote control, a more everyday example of how modern technology and the internal combustion engine has allowed us to lead such physically inactive lives. And this is a little graph which shows that almost everybody now is low in almost every single micro and phytonutrient. And that's what they look like. And that's why these young kids, when you take them into the lab, you find they have already in their bodies the early signs of those chronic degenerative diseases that will eventually make them sick and kill them long before their time. So that's chronic inflammation. That's how to treat it with the omega-3s and the polyphenols. This is another form of inflammation that we need to treat in a different way. Now, traditional diets give you lots of prebiotic fiber, which feed the little green dots there. They're microbes that live in the gut, and we call them saccharolytic because they live on starch, fermentable starches. If you eat prebiotics, these green bacteria, they're probiotics, they multiply, and they produce postbiotics, which are very good for us. For example, they reduce inflammation, kill cancer cells. This is a very healthy situation. Here's the problem. The food companies have removed prebiotics from the diet, so the good guys die out. They're replaced by the bad guys. They're the red ones. They don't eat carbohydrate. There's none there. There's no fermentable starch. They eat protein. Specifically, they eat mucins, which are proteins that create the mucus layer that would otherwise lay over and protect our cells, the colonocytes that line the gut. So the bacteria, which are proteolytic, they're eating protein, corrode the mucus. They come into contact with our cells, and because they are coated with lipopolysaccharide, cause enormous inflammation. And if there's enough inflammation, you can see the cells at the bottom, they start to separate, and now toxins can enter the blood, where they damage the liver and the heart and the blood vessels and the brain and everything else. This is a very substantial problem. The solution is absolutely blindingly obvious. Put prebiotic fibers back into the diet, where they always used to be, and restore a microbiota in the large intestine and therefore in every other tissue, which is, once again, your friend. Very easy to do. According to the World Health Organization, which still does some good science, if you eat more fiber, it reduces early death by 30%. It protects against all of these conditions, which is more than any one drug can do. It's more than all the drugs in the portfolio can do. And they're doing it by reducing inflammation in the large intestine and subsequently in all of your other tissues. Even for those of you who are concerned about microplastics, and I think we all should be, there's some quite good data that's been generated only in the last 24 months, which shows that more fiber in your diet reduces the uptake of microplastics from the diet. And I think that's a very good thing too. Now, we used to eat large amounts of this. This goes back 2,000 years, and it's based on quantitative archaeology. Not good documentation, I will admit that. And if you come back into the 19th century, we can see a population that was eating about 40 grams a day. And we know that at that level of intake, they had no IBS, no IBD, and colorectal cancer was so rare that the doctors of the day many of them never ever saw a case in their lives. But the specialists in this particular disease could tell that it was running in families. That was genetic. That was all that they saw. They only saw genetically linked cases. Everybody else was protected. And here we are. We're down to 4 grams a day, 140 to 40 to 4. So we have dysbiosis, all the wrong bacteria in the gut causing inflammation and increasing the risk of a range of substantial diseases, not just in the gut, but in the liver, in the cardiovascular system, in the central nervous system, and elsewhere. You need a mix of prebiotic fibers because once this blend enters the large intestine, everything is moving. So the short, rapidly fermenting fibers do the job first. They start shifting the population from red to green, from unhealthy to healthy, and then longer and slower fibers take over. So we use phos, that's the yellow, inulin, that's the green, 1,3,1,4 beta glucans from oats that takes over, and then finally resistant starch from sources such as green bananas. You need to have the right percentages and proportions of each of these. In this way, you can restore a healthy microbiota throughout the length of the entire intestine. So, yep, we have serious problems. Our public health is coming under enormous strain. All those diseases I listed are increasing almost year on year. We have reached the end of the road as far as drugs go. But if we can replace the basic nutritional components that we now understand are essential for good health, we can do a radical transformation of public health, which is far above and beyond anything that the pharmaceutical industry could ever hope to achieve. And we can do it safely. Medical intervention at the moment is a very important cause of death, iatrogenic illness, it's known as. Well, the tools that we use have very, very wide safety margins indeed. It's almost impossible to harm anyone using them. And if you use the kinds of blood tests that we have, dried blood spot tests, which you can do at home, then you can actually decide for yourself, how's my metabolism looking? Do I have a problem? If you don't, congratulations, you don't need us, and we'll give you your money back. If you do, come and talk to us. We'll give you a solution. You can watch the test to see the results going back to from the red to the green. As that happens, your symptoms will tend to become less severe, less frequent, And the reality is that amongst the people who follow these kinds of programs, the majority become pharmaceutically independent within the first year. For anyone who's interested, yes, there are books available, but you don't have to buy a single book. Go and visit the blog. That's in the top left. A lot of the information is there. It's absolutely freely available to anyone who is interested, and you can then make up your own mind whether this is something that you would like to follow or not. So thank you very much for listening to me, and hopefully there'll be some questions and some time for questions. But I hand it the chair back to, I think, Helen Larson.
Yes, thank you very much, Paul, for this presentation. And I have had the chance to listen to you twice now on this online podcast. So, yes, we would like to have some questions. And I will ask you first, can you describe a little bit more about the test? Because people don't know anything about the test, what you recommend. So can you just give a general overview? Because
Yes.
it would be very useful to understand what it's all about.
Well, this test actually is really quite well established by now. It's been around for almost 2 decades. It was developed by a team of scientists working in Norway and in Italy. And it's what we call it is a dried blood spot test. So this is refers to the decentralization, the disintermediation that I talked about at the beginning. It's a test you can do at home. You stick your finger with a little tiny little needle, nothing to worry about. You put 2 or 3 drops of blood onto a litmus paper, dry it, pack it into a Kevlar envelope, and then it goes off to a third-party independent forensic analytical test lab called VITAS, which is a spin-off from the University of Oslo. Send it off, then in about 2 weeks' time, you can go online, go to that lab, use your number, which came with the test, and you will have access to your test results. Nobody else does. This matches the privacy legislation that is now in widespread use in North America, Europe, and elsewhere. You're the only person who has access to your data. It measures a dozen or so lipids, and by looking at the ratios and levels of those different lipids, we have a very accurate insight into whether or not you are likely or vulnerable of developing a chronic inflammatory response. If you are, eventually, if that's not already causing symptoms, it will. And if you are, you can use the combination of omega-3s and polyphenols that we have available to shift the lipid ratios and levels in a direction that we know is associated with a damping or blunting of chronic inflammation. As you do that, your symptoms will tend to recede, and as the ratios change and as your omega-3 index changes, in many cases, the symptoms disappear altogether.
Yes, very good. But would you tell what is the percentage of the people in average in all over the world who has this silent inflammation? They don't know they have it, or they are prone to the inflammation. And what is the current situation in the world according to the test you have been seeing and doing in your research team?
Well, let me answer that question in 2 different ways. We have done a very large-scale survey. We are moving towards, I think, 1.5 or 1.75 of a million samples now, which is extremely large. We're just about to publish a paper which will present all of those results. And I can tell you that the picture all over the world is rather discouraging. The move towards ultra-processed foods, they've taken root so substantially in the diet of so many nations that it's clear that chronic inflammatory stress is now the rule and no longer the exception. Now, we can tell that that is the case also by looking at public health statistics. The numbers of people who become ill, who develop the symptoms of chronic degenerative diseases are at an all-time high. I can give you 1/3 line of argument here. We have identified populations that live in different places or have lived at different times who ate an unprocessed diet, who had very different biochemistry as a result, and we can tell that they manifest lifestyles and life expectancies which are as good as ours, but they have very little chronic degenerative disease. So their levels of, for example, heart disease and cancer are only about 10% of ours. That is also telling us that where they did not have chronic inflammatory stress, we do. So they were protected by their diet. We have been made extremely vulnerable by ours.
Yes. Okay. And we have also some questions from the public. There is one, how important is exercise 2-3 hours per week compared with diet changes according to your guidelines?
I don't like to trade off exercise and diet. I would say, and I'm sure Helen, you'd agree, that really we should be looking at both of these things.
Yeah.
There's actually a lot to be said for exercise. It appears to be cardioprotective, it appears to be chemoprotective, it is neuroprotective, and it is immunoprotective. So it's just because you're eating a healthy diet, if you're still a couch potato, you're not getting the best of all worlds. So I do think that a certain amount of exercise is very important, and I encourage it.
Yes, very good. And then we have another question about autoimmune inflammation. One person is asking in joints if they have rheumatoid arthritis or something similar. So what would be the quickest recipe to get out of this inflammation? Do you have any like these 3 steps or 4 steps or whatever? The people who already have the obvious inflammation in their body and they're suffering from a disease. So what is the must they should do or the recommendation what they should do?
Well, I think that if anyone is presenting with the symptoms of chronic inflammatory stress, and of course, if you have an autoimmune disease, almost by definition, you have at the very least focal chronic inflammation, then the first thing you should do is to damp that chronic inflammatory stress by using something like balance oil. I can tell you on the basis of my own experience with this is that it seems to be as effective as a corticosteroid, but unlike the corticosteroids, it is not associated with adverse effects, even if you use it long term. I would make one additional point. If you're throwing corticosteroids or other more toxic anti-inflammatory compounds into the mix, you're throwing in xenomolecules, foreign molecules, by and large, that the body doesn't really know how to deal with. You can regard them, broadly speaking, as toxins. If you're putting omega-3s and polyphenols into your diet, you're actually restoring normality. We used to eat much more of these compounds than we do today in the unprocessed diet. All we're doing is reestablishing normality. We're putting back into the diet what always used to be there. And we're putting those compounds back in that the body knows and recognizes and appreciates and requires and doesn't, by and large, develop any kind of toxic problems with.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Yes, but do you have also data about omega-3s in wild fish? Do you think that the fish today we are eating has the same omega-3 amounts and concentrations as we used to have before, like decades ago? Because it's always like a discussion with some people that they always think that they can get all the nutrition from the food, that it should be enough. But as we see, if we do the test, so it's not enough, even though if they try to do it in the right way.
Well, Helen, you did mention whitefish, and whitefish, by and large, are not the right fish.
No. I mean the wild fish, wild red fish.
Yes.
Or
okay. Well, if you're talking about oily fish, and let me
Yeah.
specify things like
Yeah.
herring and mackerel and salmon. Sure, if you're going to eat that kind of fish, say 3 or 4 times a week, and we do know of populations, for example, in the northwest of Europe, where they eat large amounts of these types of fish, and they actually have very good blood chemistry and very little chronic inflammatory stress. So if you like that kind of fish and you can get access to it, and you don't get sick of eating it every other day, that's absolutely a good way of achieving the same end result.
Okay, very good. So you don't think that the fish we are eating today is less nutritional than it used to be?
Well,
In
I
general.
think I would say there's two problems. If the fish has been farmed, then it may not contain as much of the omega-3s. We know this because if the fish are being fed instead of existing within the normal maritime food chains, where they're getting a lot of omega-3s and polyphenols from the algae at the bottom of the food system, the food webs. If instead they're being fed industrial food, which has a lot of corn and maize in it, they don't have the omega-3s. So that's one problem. The other problem is that certainly in some of the seas, there is now substantial pollution. Heavy metals are an issue. It's becoming more of a problem the more we use them industrially. And then you have certain you have the forever chemicals, the plasticizers, the PCBs, the organophosphorus derivatives. In some parts of the world, levels of these compounds in the water table are quite high. And there is, at the very least, a question mark over the health benefits of eating large amounts of fish from these types of waters.
Yeah. Okay. But what do you think? Which puzzle piece conventional medical stuff is missing while we are trying to evaluate how to say the level of chronic inflammation? So do you think that how could we improve it? That or do you think it's enough what we are doing in conventional medicine to I mean just detect inflammation, because it's not like very very common to do it?
No, you're right. And when we do try to measure chronic inflammation, we measure things like CRP or HSCRP, which is a very insensitive marker. It's not a marker of inflammation directly. It's a secondary marker. As you know, it's a liver protein that's generated in response to inflammation. And we see the levels go up when you have substantial disseminated chronic inflammation. So if you have, for example, influenza, then you'll see CRP levels go up. If you're a heavy smoker, we might see a rise. That's not what we see in most people. In most people, you have low levels of chronic inflammatory stress, which may only be affecting one or two tissues. So we need better tools. If you're interested in cardiovascular medicine, then you probably would want to be measuring things like, there are various very specific molecules that are released by a dysfunctional endothelia. So you have I mean, there are markers that we know of, but these are really more research tools. They're not widely used. And they're also rather expensive to test for. What we have is a test which is more generally applicable. In other words, if you have a very high 6:3 ratio and a low 3 index, we know almost by definition that you have chronic inflammatory stress, which may be impacting on a number of different tissues, and it may emerge 10 years down the road as essential hypertension, or it could manifest as COPD, or it could manifest as sickness behaviors because you have neuroinflammatory stress. And I think that that's actually a more useful way of looking at it, looking at the nature of the problem and tackling it in its most fundamental form, rather than using medical markers, which I think are actually not the right ones.
Yes, this is trouble we are having in the medical fields, that we really cannot measure the inflammation in the body, and it's always too late when we already have the symptoms. So and what would you tell the people that is it easy to do the test, or how it is, or should they need someone to how to say describe or explain the test, or is it like already if I would like to do or the first time, is it enough for my own knowledge to interpret it? Or how is it?
I think so. I don't think you'd have a problem with it at all. But then you have an MD and a PhD, and I don't know how many other degrees. So
Yeah. But I mean, for the regular people, so it's like if they would order it and do it somewhere and somehow. So how would you say it? That can you just say it in general? That what does it show? So it's maybe because we have some people who has done it, and maybe they don't know how to interpret it so well.
I think it's pretty straightforward. We'll give you the figures, but we also have pictograms. So we can say, look, there's the 6:3 ratio. This range is green, and that's healthy, and that's amber, not quite so healthy, and that's red. You have a problem here. Do something about it. So it's color coded. You can see exactly where you are on the scale, and the text will tell you exactly how you can resolve the issue. It's very straightforward.
Okay, very good. And what is your experience that how quickly can you get to the balance with a test in, I mean, if you start to consume more fish or more oil or whatever, so it's like, what is the average time for the people? I know it's individual, but still. So my experience says that I really had to have a patience to do it. Most people probably don't have it if they don't have the awareness about the subject. But what would you tell to the people that once they get their test, which is not good or which is not in balance? So is it a long run to go? Is it a marathon or is it a sprint or what is it?
I would say it's a half marathon. So it is a slow process because to change the composition of your cell membranes, it does take a little while. The literature says it's going to take about 120 days to get down the levels down to where they should be. The reality is that for people who have symptoms of chronic inflammatory stress, which might be essential hypertension, or it could be an inflammatory skin condition, it could be migraines, or some people call them migraines. What we see very often is those symptoms start to fade as early as 6 weeks. So yes, it takes a little bit of time to get there. This is not like taking, an aspirin, um, but the effects are so much more profound. The healing is so much more profound. The health benefits are so much more profound. We're not just putting a sticking plaster on it. What we're actually doing is changing your biochemistry in a way that's going to give you a much, much better chance of a long, healthy, and productive life.
Yeah, am I right if I try to tell that once we know our test results, we start to learn our body, how does it work and how it's influenced by the food we're eating, and then we also know that where do we head to, basically, if we are living in a risk zone or we are living in a healthy zone. So can it be like a test of a lifestyle or something, or how
Yes.
would you describe it? Because I have found it very, very beneficial in many ways for myself, but
I think it is a lifestyle test. And for many people it's a wake-up call. Because you may think that you're eating a healthy diet, you're doing all the right things, but I think that for whatever reason, there hasn't been that much emphasis placed on things like these 6:3 ratios in the past. And people are quite shocked. They say, "Oh, I've been eating well," or "I've been using a fish oil supplement," and then they have a bad result. And they say, "Really? Can we believe this?" And the answer to this, and the reason for that, is that most fish oil supplements are extremely badly designed. If they don't have the right polyphenols mixed in with the fish, with the omega-3s, they won't work. You have to have them both.
yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, but we have another question here from public, which, oh, what is this? Was that someone is asking, recently appeared an article in the press titled "Olive oil may not always be beneficial. It turns out that the oleic acid in the oil has a role to play." And so
Yep.
according to a new study, the fatty acid found in olive oil and many other oils stimulates the production of new fat cells in the body, creating conditions that can lead to increased fat storage and unwanted weight gain over time. What are the thoughts and comments about that?
Well, I certainly don't recommend drinking half a liter of olive oil a day. But the amount of olive oil that's in balance oil is so small, it's too small to make any difference at all. And I just want to say that oleic acid is one of those fatty acids we make in our own bodies anyway. So the human metabolism is very, very familiar with oleic acid, and at the doses that we're working with, it has no adversarial effects whatsoever.
Okay, yeah, very good. Yeah, definitely, I agree with you. And then we have another question from the public, which is if one is already diagnosed with leaky gut, is there any contraindications for xenobiotic? And how should we start, or which approach should we do in the beginning?
Well, if you have leaky gut, and probably one of the best ways of actually testing for that I mean, substantively, is by measuring endotoxemia, which is not easy to do. You can measure LPS, you can measure LPS binding protein. There are specific ways of doing this. And so for a nutritionist to say, oh, you've got leaky gut, I mean, I don't really give that very much credit because unless you can test for it, unless you can measure it, I'm not necessarily going to believe it. If, however, someone has got leaky gut, that means they have dysbiosis, the form of dysbiosis that is produced very frequently by the modern diet. The best thing you can do is by start putting those fibers back into the diet that we always used to eat, restoring a healthy microbiota, and they will then mend the epithelial barrier function of the gut. They'll put it back to where it should be. They do the heavy lifting.
But I, as a doctor, can say that the leaky gut is very underestimated and underdiagnosed in the whole world, I guess, because
I agree.
We don't have the test for that to do it. It's very expensive. It's not in the governmental programs and so on. But what is your awareness about the percentage of the population all over the world? That how many of us do we have leaky gut? Because I have understood that the percentage is pretty high, in fact.
Well, you're asking me an impossible question, and I
think
you know that. I think you know that.
Yes, I know. That's why I asked, because I struggle it with myself.
Well, no, but there is one way of looking at it. If you have leaky gut, what kinds of problems are you going to have? Or where do those lipopolysaccharides and those other exotoxins, where do they go? The first tissue they hit is the liver. And one of the things that they do is they drive MASLD and MASH. And look at the figures for MASLD and MASH, and they now affect almost 50% of the world's population. So I would say, and in answer to your specific question, I believe that the fraction of the population that now has leaky gut is probably over a third and maybe approximating to a half of the world's population.
Okay, that's what I was thinking as well, in fact, that it can be something like this.
Mm-hmm.
And as you said, that this is like very important pathway of the chronic inflammation in your slides. So basically, if we try to improve our gut health, because I also studied functional medicine, and they always say that gut is the first target to heal. So can you give the 3 steps to how to heal your gut, or everyone's gut, basically? What are the steps?
Well, first of all, can I just agree with you that I think it's very important to get gut function right, because it's clearly compromised in a very, very large percentage of the patients that we see. I think restoring eubiosis is probably the very first thing you need to do. If you have IBD as opposed to IBS, you have some very substantial chronic inflammatory problems involving probably the outer layer and the medial layer of the gut, in very severe cases, the inner layers as well. So what I would do in those cases, I wouldn't necessarily start throwing large amounts of prebiotics into the mix to start with. What I would do, I would start with using balance oil, bring the ratio of 6s to 3s down to maybe 3 to 1, 2.5, 2 to 1, bring the 3 index up to about 8%, maybe a little bit more than that. And at that point, you're stopping the chronic inflammatory stress in the internal and medial layers of the intestine. And now you can start adding the prebiotic fibers to the diet, and it just goes down much more easily. Once you have established a new equilibrium, what I'm seeing is that in the majority of cases, you get something that's very close to a restoration of normal function.
Yeah, but what do you recommend? How long should be the restoration of the normal microbiota? Because it takes time, of course, once you take the oil and once you take the fibers. So what would be the average recommendation for the treatment? So is it like half a year, or is it like, what would you say?
No. If you're using balance oil to restore your lipid profile, that's going to take maybe 100 days, 120 days. And then once you start using the xenobiotic, you can move from dysbiosis to eubiosis within 7 to 10 days. Because keep in mind that the microbial doubling rate may be as short as 4 to 5 hours. So once you start putting the prebiotic fibers in there, your probiotic species, and I'm not talking just about lactobacilli and bifidobacteria, but all of the other saccharolytic species, and there's a lot of them, then they start to increase. And if they're doubling every 4 to 5 hours, it's a logarithmic increase. So you get a very, very rapid transformation in your microbial populations, which is pretty much complete by 7 to 10 days.
Okay, that's very good information. I didn't know it can change so quickly.
Very fast.
Yeah, but do you recommend to take additional probiotics as well or no?
I don't think you need them. The clinical data that people use to support the use of probiotics is very sketchy. And that's one reason why EFSA hasn't yet agreed to a single really significant health claim for any of the probiotic species. I'm not saying that they don't have some applicability, but I'm rather disappointed by what I've seen so far. Don't forget, you have your own probiotics inside you. Maybe not enough of them because you haven't supported them, but you send in the fuel and your own probiotics will say, thank you very much. Now we can get to work. And they know the terrain. They're adapted to you. All they need is a helping hand. Give them the fuel that they need and they'll take the job over for you.
Okay, can you tell to the people what are the best probiotics basically as a food type of food, or is there anything you could recommend to the people?
Ooh.
Or there are these fermented products and this kind of stuff, but is there anything else?
Well, the fermented foods I think have a place. I like iron, which is it's a Turkish fermented drink. It's like kefir basically. I think there's some quite good data to support that. The live yogurts that companies like Danone sell, I'm not convinced by. I don't think the data is particularly good. For those people who have IBS, there is a symbiotic called Simprove, which is made by a small British company, which actually does have some quite good data behind it. But it tastes horrible, and really you'd only want to take it if you had a substantial health problem.
Yeah, okay, very good. And we have another question from the public, which is our body gets energy from carbohydrates mainly. Please tell me what people with insulin resistance should do and how to eat properly in this case.
Well, you can switch from digestible carbohydrates to fermentable carbohydrates. So instead of eating the starches that you find, for example, in grains, switch to the starches you find in beans, pulses, and legumes. So they have less of an impact on blood glucose. And of course, the other types of foods, from which we derive large amounts of energy, are the fats, the lipids. So if you're concerned about blood glucose control, I would say, yes, less sugars, cut down on sugars, cut down on starches, eat more fermentable starches, more proteins and lipids, and for heaven's sake, take more exercise. I mean, we're talking about type 2 diabetes here. I mean, for
yes, of course, yeah.
Type 1's different, of course.
Yes, yeah. Okay, good. And then another question is about whole grain oatmeal porridge. And does it promote the inflammation? How do you feel or know about the porridge? Porridge in general. What is your feeling? This is always controversial.
Well, I'm very biased because I come from Scotland and I was raised on porridge. All Scots people eat lots and lots of porridge.
Yeah.
I think that the oats, as you know, contain 1314 beta glucans, and these are prebiotic fibers. So they will make a contribution to improving the microbiota. I think there's definitely a place for them in your diet.
Okay, very good. And then we have a question, what are some good food sources of the different types of dietary fiber? The slow, medium, and fast fiber. So can you recommend or comment that?
Right. Well, FOS, which is a very rapidly acting fiber, you can find in things like onions and leeks, and to some extent garlic, although obviously in garlic you're not eating very much of that. Inulin, the best sources would be the two different kinds of artichoke. You've got the globe artichoke, which is, the one that looks a bit like a sun, like a flower. And you have the Jerusalem artichoke, which is a tuber. They both contain very large amounts of inulin. For 1314 beta glucans, which is a slower fiber. We mentioned oats, for example. Resistant starch, the best sources would be pulses and legumes, and also green banana. Now, you can also take a food such as a potato, and if you cook it and cool it and cook it and cool it, the starch crystallizes. It's known as a retrograde crystallization, and it switches from being a digestible starch into a fermentable starch. So you can make your own fermentable carbs by simply changing your cooking techniques.
Okay. And then we have another one. What about magnesium and vitamin D effects in the body and preventive health?
Well, let me take them in reverse order. Hypovitaminosis D is very common. It's common in the higher latitudes, and we even see it in the temperate, even in the tropical zones, because we have told people to stay out of the sun. And the reason we did was a specialist called Rona McKee at Glasgow University, who was seeing a lot of skin cancer in her patients, and said, "Oh, it's because everyone's getting too much sunlight." Well, if you have a lot of sunlight and you eat a terrible diet, you might have a problem. But Rona was seeing a lot of Celts. She was working in Glasgow. Red hair, pale skin, very high skin cancer risk rate. And those risks aren't necessarily applicable to other skin types. I would also say that we have become vulnerable in all kinds of ways, in ways we were not before. If you go back to the 19th century, a population that was largely agricultural. People worked in the fields from dawn to dusk. Very little skin cancer because they were eating a diet which contained lots of compounds that were protective against cancer. Our diet is so empty, so depleted, that when we go into the sunlight, we burn more easily and we are more vulnerable to skin cancer than our ancestors used to be. Once you get onto the health protocol, I think it reduces the risk of skin cancer. You can then spend a little bit more time in the sun, and providing you don't burn yourself to a crisp, you're going to be making more vitamin D in your skin, which is what we always used to do. We always used to be animals that spent a certain amount of time out of doors and not sitting in offices. If you're low in vitamin D, you're probably going to have problems with reduced resistance to infection. You're probably going to have an increased risk of some, at least, autoimmune diseases, and you may be more at risk also of certain types of cardiovascular and oncological problems. So bringing your vitamin D up to where it should be is, for many people, a good idea. Magnesium, and I'm covering, I'm running very fast across a very wide range of topics here. Hypomagnesemia is a bit of a problem as well. And we know that that's associated with a number of health issues if it's sustained for long periods of time. I think there is a rationale for it for some people to take magnesium supplements. The question then is which kind? There's a range of them. And our ability to absorb magnesium is, as you know, it's actually quite restricted. So I think if anyone is going to be wanting to take magnesium supplements, you would probably be best to speak to a nutritionist about which particular supplement is best for you.
Yes, the magnesium subject is very tricky, and it's a kind of headache, in fact. But yeah, as you said, that we most of us, as you didn't say most of us, but I think that most of us are deficient in magnesium, in fact, because
I wouldn't say deficient. I would say depleted.
depleted. Okay, yeah, exactly. Yeah. But that we don't get it enough from our food, basically. Yes. And since we know it plays a huge role in more than 300 different reactions in the body and cells, so basically, if we don't have it enough, so we are suffering in many, many levels.
I agree. It's another area of vulnerability.
Yeah.
I agree with what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, okay. I think these are most of the questions that we have had from the public now. And if in the end, I don't know, Freddie, how much time do we have? It's probably.
I think let's give people like 3 last questions in live. If people have live, I see that Katrin Haiba is showing her hand.
Okay, very good.
Katrin, if you still have your question, please ask.
Oh, I actually already, it got answered. I put it into the chat as well. It was about the different types of food sources of fiber. So thank you for answering already.
Well, I didn't completely answer that question because there are other fibers that we also need in the diet. So I've talked about 4 of them, but we should also talk about cellulose and hemicellulose. We think of them more as roughage, and you need roughage as well to basically it helps peristalsis. Hemicellulose, much to my surprise, I found out we actually can break some of that down. There are certain keystone microbial species in the gut that do have the ability to break down hemicellulose into smaller fractions, which are then fuel for some of our other bacteria. Cellulose, we can't break down, not at all. It goes in and it comes out the same way that it went in, but we do need to have cellulose in our diet. I think given the current modern industrial diet, most of us need more of that too. Your best source would be probably things like green beans. They have a very high levels of cellulose. Or if you like breakfast cereal, once you've emptied the pack, consume the cardboard. Plenty of cellulose in there. No, I'm joking. That's not good. That's not good to do.
Yeah, but I mean, basically, I guess what I eat is mostly plant-based. I do eat fish as well, but lots of like whole plant foods, like lots of beans and lentils and
Yeah.
all kinds of veggies. So is it safe to assume that I'm getting proper fiber or?
I think you probably are. We're working on a test for dysbiosis, a dried blood sample spot test, which we're very proud of. It's going to be released at the end of the year, and then if you're interested, you can test yourself to see whether your diet is doing for you what you think it's doing.
Very cool.
Are there any more questions?
Yes, I have one. But it's probably a very difficult one, and I don't know how it even attaches to this whole subject that we.
I like difficult questions.
But I was wondering because Helen at first talked about not having enough diagnostic methods to actually measure inflammation in the body. And I'm a nutritional therapist myself, and I know about ferritin being an indicator of inflammation. And I've researched about ferroptosis as well. But how do these things kind of fit into the picture?
Well, I mean, people talk a lot about apoptosis, but there's about, I think, 10 or 11 different programs, forms of programmed cell death. Ferroptosis is another one, and it's quite an explosive one. It's a very dramatic form of cell death. I don't think that has got very much to do with ferritin levels. I agree with you that ferritin, we can use it as a rough, approximate guide to certain types of chronic inflammation. But again, I don't think it's very sensitive. If you're looking for an accessible and sensitive measure of chronic inflammatory stress, one of the ways in which you can measure that is using a sphygmomanometer. If you have a lot of chronic inflammatory stress, it's going to, via endothelial dysfunction, it's going to start to neutralize some of the classical vasodilator influences. And so your TPR starts to go up. Your arterioles start to constrict. And if you start seeing diastolic blood pressure starting to creep up, you almost certainly have chronic inflammatory stress. Now, it's not 100% a guide because you may have hypertension as a result of renal or adrenal or hypophyseal pathology, but most cases of hypertension are essential hypertension and are caused by endothelial dysfunction, which is a chronic inflammatory condition. So very old-fashioned, but your diastolic blood pressure is actually telling us something meaningful about the levels of chronic inflammatory stress in your body.
Okay.
Thank you.
And may we have one more question from the public, which is in the chat. It's about 17-year-old boy who has been taking Ascent for 3 years and hasn't still got into the balance. So what is your recommendation for him? So what should he do? Should he change for another oil, or what would be?
Well, it sounds as if he's either underdosing or he's malabsorbing. So, first of all, does he have impaired biliary function? If he has impaired biliary function, and we should perhaps do a proper workup on him, switch to Aqua X. That'll circumvent that problem. If he has exocrine pancreatic insufficiency, which is unlikely but could be at play here, then co-ingest an exogenous lipase with the balance oils. That'll enable him to actually digest the lipids more easily. What we find in a small number of cases is if you have dysbiosis, then you're not good at absorbing these fatty acids either, which is rather odd. But the gut not only processes material one way, it sends information up and down. If you have dysbiosis, it actually talks to the small intestine and impairs the digestion and absorption of certain compounds, including some of the fatty acids. So it may be that by adding xenobiotic to the mix, you'll suddenly find that the balance test starts to move in a positive direction. Alternatively, he's just underdosing. I don't really like Ascent myself anyway. I'd rather take the balance oil and use the so many mils per kilogram body weight formula, which works in the vast majority of cases.
Okay, thank you. So, Freddie, I give a word to you now, so you know about the schedule and everything what we are due to here. So.
I also had a question. Sorry, I also I was written. Yes, the last question. It was about Protect.
Oh, I don't see it here.
Yes, yes. Is it allowed to use Protect during the cancer treatment? Was my question.
The answer is yes, and I recommend it because it will help to protect the bone marrow.
Bone marrow?
Yes.
What is bone marrow?
Well, okay. For people who are taking chemotherapy, myelosuppression is a very frequent problem. Your white blood cell counts fall, you become more vulnerable to infection. By taking Protect, you are mitigating that risk.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, do we have time for 2 more questions? One is, what do you recommend for people who have fish allergy? Yes, this is a very common question because, yeah, maybe you can say it in 2 words.
Very common. You can take balance oil because there is no fish protein in balance oil. It is non-allergenic. If you're worried though, and I understand if you are, then use the vegan oil.
Yeah, very good. And the last one is that, is it possible to get rid of the bacterial infection with a health protocol, basically?
What kind of bacterial infection?
It's a skin bacteria, and it's oh my god, now I can't say what is it in English. So basically, it's oh my god. So basically, skin infection what older people have in their legs usually.
Okay. No, the health protocol I don't think is going to do very much for that. For that, I would recommend something called KIB 500. You can find that on the internet.
KIB
500. Yeah.
500. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Then we close question session here.
Helen, thank you so much for acting as the chairperson.
Thank you for coming, and we are really happy that we could have you, and very honored to have you here and have this discussion. So it's always like pleasure. So, Freddie, do you want to say something?
Yes, I want to say you also thank you, Paul Clayton, because yesterday when we talked, actually you wrote that you have been last 10 days 7 different countries. So we
Yes,
can only so we can only imagine how busy you are, and everywhere people wants to have a meetings with you. What I would maybe would like to ask you, Paul, can we make a new webinar at the end of the month or at the beginning of the next month and talk more about the tests? So you can let us know when you have time, and we could do a new webinar and to tell more exact steps how we can balance omega-6 and the omega-3 ratio. And people who are at the moment on the line would like to get the email, then you can write here on the chat your email and we can send information to everyone. But with that, yeah, last words to you, Paul, and one more time, huge thanks to Paul, you and Helen, and also our translators, Maria Cristina, and also Marina, who translated all this, our conversation, the Estonian and the Russian language, and of course, all the guests as well.
No, thank you to all of the people who participated, and my thanks to Helen for chairing so ably. And I'd be happy to come back. Let's you and I discuss a time and a date when we could do that.
Yeah, let's do that. Thank you, and have a nice evening, everyone, and hope to see you all soon again. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.